The galaxy had long since learned to measure strength by the hardness of scales, the thickness of exoskeletons, the energy of psionic waves, or the endurance of machine-flesh hybrids. By such metrics, humanity stood as a curiosity, a frail anomaly allowed into the interstellar community only because its ambition outpaced its biology. They were fragile bipeds, too soft to be warriors, too primitive to be strategists, and too divided to be trusted with real responsibility. The Galactic Council tolerated their presence the way one tolerates a child wandering into a gathering of generals. Captain Marcus Vaynar had lived under that judgment since his first posting beyond Earth. The stares of reptilian officers, the condescending laughter of insectoid tacticians, the subtle dismissals from towering brutes who could bend steel beams with their claws, all of it was so constant that it no longer pierced him. It had become background noise, like the hum of a ship's reactor. What still cut deep, however, was the quiet resentment on the faces of his own people, men who bore the same insignia as him, yet carried the weight of humiliation in their shoulders. Humanity's reputation poisoned every introduction, every attempt to prove themselves. The colony outpost of Duranis served as both a trade hub and a forward observation post along the rim of Council-controlled territory. Its docking arms bristled with ships of every shape and size, but human craft were rare and often the smallest in view. Marcus' ship, the frigate Resolute, was one such vessel, a lean construct of human engineering, dependable but unimpressive beside the gleaming leviathans of alien allies. When it settled into dock, few noticed and fewer cared. On the observation deck, Elias Traynor leaned against the railing, eyes narrowed at the incoming waves of alien traffic. He was older than Marcus by a decade, a veteran of skirmishes too minor to make council records, yet fierce enough to etch scars across his face. His cynicism was legendary among the small human contingent. "They don't see us, Captain," Elias muttered without turning. "Not really. We're shadows. Background noise. You could march naked through the council chamber, and they'd just chuckle about fragile skin burning under the lights." Marcus allowed a brief smile but didn't answer. Elias' bitterness had truth in it, but Marcus had no interest in feeding it. His duty was to hold the line, no matter how invisible it seemed. Nearby, Dr. Kieran Holt adjusted a portable scanner, his eyes darting across the screen with restless energy. Unlike the hardened soldiers, Holt carried the restless spark of a man who lived for questions rather than answers. His fascination lay not in proving human worth through force, but through biology. He spoke with a constant urgency, as if discovery was always one breath away. "Fragility," Holt said almost to himself, "isn't the weakness they think it is. It's the cost of flexibility. Bones that break, but heal stronger. Minds that shatter, yet rebuild with new patterns. We adapt. We improvise. No other race here does it half as fast. That's what they're blind to." Elias snorted. "Tell that to a Vrock's warlord when he snaps your spine in half. Let's see how quickly you adapt then." The youngest of their group, Jonas Kale, stiffened at Elias' words. His jaw clenched, and for a moment Marcus thought the boy would speak. But Jonas said nothing, his gaze fixed on the starlit void beyond the glass. He carried silence like armor, but beneath it was a storm Marcus understood too well. Jonas' brother had died 2 years earlier during a joint training exercise with alien forces. The accident had been dismissed with a shrug by their allies, a casualty of weakness, unavoidable when fragile flesh couldn't endure the same trials. For Jonas, that death had hardened into a vow, though he rarely spoke of it aloud. Marcus broke the quiet. "We don't need to prove anything today. Orders are simple. Maintain observation, monitor the rim sectors, and keep the Resolute combat ready. That's all." But even as he spoke, his eyes lingered on the incoming data streams. Duranis sat close to the edge of mapped territory, where reports had trickled in of missing ships and dead colonies. Officially, the Council dismissed these as anomalies, piracy, or natural disasters. Unofficially, whispers carried a sharper edge. Whole fleets lost with no distress calls. Trade routes abandoned. fragments of blackened hulls drifting where once proud civilizations had thrived. Marcus had read every report, studied every fragment of evidence. To him, it felt less like chance and more like a shadow stretching steadily across the stars. And shadows, in his experience, never retreated on their own. That evening, the four of them gathered in the common chamber of the Resolute. The room was modest compared to alien quarters, but human design favored function over spectacle. A low hum from the ship's systems filled the silence as they reviewed the latest transmissions. "Another colony gone dark," Holt said, voice hushed. He enlarged the feed on the holotable. "Outer settlement. No sign of battle, no survivors. Just gone." Elias leaned back, arms crossed. "Pirates again, no doubt. Or maybe the locals packed up and left. Who cares? Council doesn't." Jonas spoke then, his voice low, steady, and edged with something Marcus recognized as restrained fury. "People don't just vanish. Not whole settlements. Something's moving out there and nobody wants to admit it." Marcus nodded slowly. "I think you're right." Their eyes turned to him, waiting for elaboration. He weighed his words carefully. Leadership wasn't about feeding fears, but neither was it about denying truth. "We've been called weak for as long as we've been here," Marcus said. "And maybe compared to others, we are. But weakness doesn't excuse blindness. Whatever's happening on the rim, the Council refuses to see it. That means it falls to us." Holt's eyes gleamed, more with intellectual curiosity than dread. "You think this is deliberate? A coordinated force?" "I think," Marcus replied, "we're standing at the edge of something big enough to swallow everything we know. And when it comes, they'll look to anyone who's still standing. That has to be us." The words settled over them like gravity. Elias broke it first with a derisive laugh, though it carried little conviction. "We? The mighty human detachment of Duranis? What are we going to do, Captain? Throw rocks? Bleed on their boots until they slip?" But Jonas didn't laugh. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "We'll fight," he said simply. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, heavy, something alive between them. Marcus saw in Jonas' eyes the echo of grief sharpened into determination. He saw in Holtz the hunger of a man eager to prove a theory with the lives of billions at stake. He saw in Elias, beneath layers of cynicism, the faintest flicker of belief that maybe, just maybe, humans had a role yet to play beyond mockery. Marcus straightened, shoulders set, voice calm but firm. "If the Council won't acknowledge the threat, then we'll be ready when it reaches us. That's our duty. That's how we prove we're more than fragile flesh." Outside the viewport, stars shimmered in vast indifference, but Marcus felt the shift within his men. A current had turned. They might still be the weakest race, but weakness had a way of hardening into resolve when survival was on the line. Later, alone in his quarters, Marcus stared at the tactical map, the glowing dots of vanished colonies marked in red. They formed no neat pattern, no predictable advance, but the randomness itself was a message. Something was testing the edges, probing for weaknesses. He traced the path with his finger, and his chest tightened. Every instinct told him this was only the beginning. For years, humanity had been dismissed as irrelevant. But Marcus could feel it like the distant rumble before a storm. The moment was coming when the galaxy would learn the truth. Weakness was not fragility. Weakness was endurance untested, waiting for the fire that would forge it into something unbreakable. And when that fire came, humanity would either burn away or burn brighter than anyone had ever believed possible. The council chamber was designed to inspire awe, a vaulted cathedral of glass and metal suspended above the city of Duranis, its walls alive with holographic constellations. Representatives of dozens of species filled the tiers, each more imposing than the last, scaled, armored, crystalline, or cloaked in shimmering energy fields. Among them, the humans were an afterthought, confined to a narrow bench at the chamber's periphery. Marcus stood at the center of that bench, back straight, while the council debated the latest reports from the galactic rim. "Piracy," declared a six-limbed Threx official, mandibles clattering. An uncoordinated rabble preying on weak routes. Hardly worth council attention. Anomalies, added a serpentine envoy, her scales gleaming beneath the chamber lights. Star storms, reactor failures, human error. Colonies vanish all the time. Marcus' jaw tightened. Human error. The phrase had become shorthand for incompetence in council tongues. Every disaster, every unexplained failure, if humans were involved, blame was simple. Elias shifted beside him, muttering under his breath, "Maybe we should just take the blame now. Save them the trouble." Marcus silenced him with a glance. This was no place for sarcasm, though the sting of it mirrored his own thoughts. A booming voice filled the chamber, deep and resonant. High Chancellor R.A. Chakol, a titan of a species whose armored hide gleamed like obsidian, raised his clawed hand for silence. Enough. The Rim territories are peripheral. The Council will not expend fleets chasing shadows. Marcus stepped forward before caution could still him. His voice rang clear across the chamber. With respect, Chancellor, shadows are often cast by something real. Colonies don't vanish without cause. At least send reconnaissance. The chamber erupted in laughter, a chorus of chittering, hissing, and rumbling tones. A fragile human daring to lecture the council, it was comedy to them. R.A. Chakol's golden eyes narrowed, not in anger but in amusement. "And who would you send, Captain? Your fragile kin? Shall we task humanity with guarding the galaxy's edges?" The laughter swelled again, crueler this time. Marcus felt his men tense behind him, Jonas most of all. The young soldier's fists clenched, knuckles white. Elias muttered another curse under his breath. Holt, for once, remained silent, though his eyes burned with intensity. Marcus did not flinch. "If no one else will stand at the edge, then yes. Send us." The chamber grew quiet, surprised more by his boldness than his request. The silence held long enough for R.A. Chakol to study him with something that might have been curiosity, or pity. Then the Chancellor dismissed him with a wave. "Very well. Let the humans have their vigil. If these shadows exist, they will fall upon the weakest first. Let fragility prove its worth." The session ended soon after, but the weight of those words clung to Marcus as they returned to the Resolute. They had been granted what they asked for, but not out of trust, out of derision. Humanity had been cast as bait. The Resolute departed Duranes within the cycle, engines burning toward the rim. The crew worked in silence, each man carrying his own thoughts. It was Holt who broke it, pacing the deck as his mind unraveled aloud. "They've made a mistake," he said. "Not us them. Sending us isn't punishment, it's opportunity. If the enemy's out there, we'll be the first to meet them. And when we survive, the Council will have to acknowledge. Or we'll be bones in the void," Elias interrupted. "That's the other option, document." Jonas looked up from his console, his voice firm. "Then we fight until there's nothing left." Marcus let them speak. Arguments were fuel. Better they burn among themselves than fester. His attention remained fixed on the star map ahead, where empty systems stretched like an endless dark sea. Somewhere out there, something was waiting. 3 days into their patrol, they found it. The distress call came from an Illyrian freighter, a massive vessel of living crystal whose crew boasted psionic gifts. Its signal was fractured, distorted by static, but the desperation was unmistakable. Marcus gave the order, without hesitation. The Resolute altered course, engines straining as they cut across the void. The freighter appeared on sensors first, a silhouette adrift against the stars. Hull breaches pocked its crystalline form, and no life signs registered within. At first glance, it looked like a corpse left to drift. But then the shadows around it moved. Dozens of shapes detached themselves from the wreck, sleek and predatory, their outlines shifting as though woven from liquid metal. They moved with a disturbing fluidity, neither machine nor beast, their surfaces alive with pulsing bioluminescence. Holt's voice cracked. "Contact multiple contacts. Unknown configuration. Dear God, they're swarming." "Battle stations," Marcus ordered. The klaxon blared, and the Resolute's modest guns came alive. The swarm descended. The first salvo lit the void, human rounds tearing into the shifting shapes. Some shattered, but most adapted, their surfaces hardening against subsequent fire. They struck back in coordinated arcs, beams of searing energy lashing against the Resolute's shields. The frigate shook violently but held. Marcus barked orders, calm in the chaos. Elias, bring us into the debris field. Make them chase us through it. Holt analyzed their patterns. Jonas, focus fire on stragglers. Don't let them regroup. The frigate darted into the broken hull of the freighter, weaving through crystalline wreckage. The swarm pursued, but their speed became their weakness. Sharp turns and sudden cover baffled their formations. Human gunners, trained in improvisation rather than rigid drills, exploited every slip. Piece by piece, the swarm fractured. Jonas hooped over comms as one predator burst apart under his barrage. They bleed, Captain. They bleed. But the victory was not without cost. A beam lanced through the starboard side, hurling Elias against the railing. Blood streamed from his temple, but he staggered back to his station, cursing. The Resolute groaned under strain, its shields flickering. Holt's voice cut through the din. They're learning. Every volley they adapt. The same tactics won't work twice. Marcus gritted his teeth. Then we won't use the same tactics twice. Keep moving, keep thinking. Outguess them. For hours, the battle raged. Not a clash of brute force, but a test of endurance and invention. Where other species relied on tradition and instinct, humanity relied on unpredictability. Feints, ambushes, sudden retreats followed by vicious counterattacks. Each maneuver bought survival. Finally, with the Resolute battered and near collapse, the swarm faltered. The last of their number dissolved into the void, retreating as silently as they had come. Silence filled the ship. Alarms blared, bulkheads hissed, and the crew slumped in exhaustion. Elias collapsed into his chair, bloodied but grinning bitterly. Well, Captain, we found your shadows. Marcus surveyed the ruined freighter beyond, its crystalline carcass a graveyard. Not a single survivor. The enemy had devoured everything, and yet the Council would call it accident, anomaly, anything but war. Holt spoke softly, almost reverently. Do you see it, Marcus? Do you understand? They adapt, but so do we. Faster. Smarter. They thought we'd break. Instead, we endured. Jonas' voice was steel. This isn't over. Not until every last one of them is dead. Marcus didn't answer. His gaze lingered on the darkness, where the swarm had vanished. This was no isolated attack. This was the first ripple of a tide that would soon sweep across every world. The galaxy had laughed at humanity's weakness. But when the tide came, it would not be strength of scale or claw that held the line. It would be the fragile ones who had learned to endure, to improvise, to rise from ruin again and again. The Resolute limped back toward Council space, carrying proof the others could no longer ignore. Humanity had survived the first encounter. Now the war had begun. The Council could not laugh when the Resolute returned, battered but alive, bearing records of the swarm. The footage played across the chamber in stark silence, liquid metal predators tearing through Illyrian crystal, beams shredding hull, human ingenuity turning wreckage into cover and victory. For once, the chamber did not jeer when Marcus stood to speak. They are not anomalies. They are not pirates. They are a species bent on consumption, and they are learning. Every battle makes them stronger. But we can outthink them, outmaneuver them if we act now. Murmurs rippled through the alien delegates. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others narrowed eyes at the implication that fragile humans had done what their mightiest fleets had failed to achieve. Chancellor Arechekol rose, massive frame casting shadows across the chamber. You claim endurance where others have fallen, yet you admit the enemy adapts. How long before your unpredictability fails you? Marcus did not waver. As long as necessary. We adapt faster. Where they refine a pattern, we abandon it. Where they harden, we change the strike. No doctrine binds us. That is why we survived. The words echoed longer than he expected. For the first time, silence carried not dismissal, but consideration. After the session, Elias limped beside him through the crystalline corridors, one hand pressed against freshly stitched ribs. Careful, Captain. Another speech like that, and they might start thinking we're worth keeping alive. Marcus allowed himself the faintest smile. Maybe they should. Over the next weeks, humanity was reluctantly integrated into the larger defense effort. Not as equals. The Council would never grant that so quickly, but as irregulars, a peculiar tool for peculiar problems. And peculiar problems soon arrived. Coalition fleets, proud and orderly, clashed with the swarm along the rim. Again and again, they were torn apart, their rigid tactics unraveled by the enemy's endless adaptation. In desperation, commands were handed to human captains, their ships sent where others had failed. To everyone's surprise, those missions returned. Not without scars, not without dead, but victorious. The pattern was undeniable. Humans thrived where others faltered. It began with ambushes. Marcus led the Resolute and a handful of allied vessels into asteroid belts where swarm hunters had been sighted. Rather than form the neat phalanxes of alien navies, the humans scattered, each ship acting independently, weaving through rocks and dust. The swarm pursued, only to be split apart, drawn into kill zones of their own making. Jonas' gunnery fire crippled one after another, his shouts over calms raw with triumph. Elias, gritting through lingering injuries, devised firing arcs that twisted conventional doctrine into chaos. Holt recorded every encounter, his voice shaking with awe as he chronicled human improvisation. "They don't understand it," Holt whispered after one such victory. "To them, order is survival. To us, survival is change. That's the edge. That's our weapon." The victories built momentum. Alien officers who once mocked now studied human maneuvers. Entire fleets were restructured, imitating the chaos humans wielded instinctively. Still, Marcus knew the tide had not turned. The swarm learned too, their attacks growing sharper, their formations more cunning. The war was not won, it was only balanced on a knife's edge. One night, in the dim quiet of the Resolute's mess, Jonas finally spoke the thoughts gnawing at him. "Why us, Captain? Why do we keep surviving when everyone else falls?" Marcus studied him across the table. Jonas had hardened since the first encounter, eyes sharper, voice steadier. The grief of his brother's death had transformed into something fierce and dangerous. "Because we don't fear breaking," Marcus said at last. "Others fight to preserve themselves. We fight knowing we're fragile, knowing we'll bleed, knowing we'll lose. But we fight anyway. That's what they can't understand." Jonas nodded slowly, as though carving the words into his soul. The next campaign would test that belief. Intelligence reported a swarm cluster building a hive in the hollowed remains of a gas giant's moon. If allowed to grow, it could spawn fleets that would drown entire sectors. The council debated for days, unable to agree on strategy. At last, Marcus volunteered humanity to lead the assault. If they failed, no one would mourn their loss. If they succeeded, the galaxy might survive another year. The operation was madness, a handful of ships against a fortress. Yet madness was what humans had been built to wield. Marcus outlined the plan with precision, every detail a gamble, every move a risk. "We hit them fast. Strike their birthing chambers, collapse the tunnels, then retreat before they adapt. No formations, no chains of command beyond necessity. Everyone fights as they see fit. Trust your instincts." Elias raised an eyebrow. "So the grand plan is chaos." Marcus met his gaze. "The grand plan is survival. Chaos is how we get there." When the assault began, the Resolute led the charge through jagged canyons of the shattered moon. The swarm rose to meet them, endless streams of shifting predators swarming through tunnels. Beams seared, metal screamed, and every breath was a battle. Jonas' cannons blazed, tearing through the vanguard. Elias barked vectors no alien would have considered, weaving them through death. Holt shouted warnings as the enemy shifted, recording every adaptation with frantic precision. Explosions tore through the hive's walls as demolition teams planted charges, collapsing tunnels in clouds of burning rock. The swarm howled, if such creatures could howl, their luminous bodies writhing as their nest came apart. But victory was never clean. A beam struck the Resolute's flank, throwing Marcus across the bridge. Blood filled his mouth as he dragged himself upright, vision swimming. The ship reeled, alarms shrieking, but still it fought. Jonas' voice cut through the chaos. They're falling back. The hive's collapsing. Through the viewport, Marcus saw it. The moon shattering, fire ripping through caverns, swarm vessels scattering like insects from flame. Against all reason, they had won. The fleet limped away, battered but alive. In the aftermath, council officials spoke with new gravity when addressing the humans. No laughter, no mockery. Only the wary respect one gives to fire. Humanity had proven not only survival, but victory. In private, Holt pressed Marcus with excitement he could barely contain. It's more than tactics, Marcus. It's evolution. Do you understand? We change under pressure faster than they can measure. Our bodies, our minds, they call it fragility, but it's acceleration. We're not the weakest. We're the most dangerous. Marcus listened in silence, though the truth of it pulsed in his veins. He had seen Jonas fight with wounds that should have ended him, seen Elias devise brilliance through pain, seen Holt's theories transform into salvation. Fragile flesh endured, adapted, and sharpened into something steel could never match. Yet beneath the victories lay an unease Marcus could not shake. Each battle left scars deeper than the last, each survival a coin bought with lives. Humanity was proving itself, yes, but at a cost no council would bear for them. One night, alone on the darkened bridge, Marcus studied the star maps again. The swarm's pattern was no longer random. Their retreats were calculated, their feints deliberate. They were not only reacting, they were planning. The thought chilled him. If the swarm learned as humans did, if they adapted not only in form but in strategy, then the war was hurtling towards something far greater than skirmishes on the rim. He clenched his fists on the railing, whispering to the void. When the storm breaks, they'll all see, and we'll be the ones standing in the fire. Behind him, Jonas' voice broke the silence. The young soldier had entered quietly, eyes hard as steel. Then we'd better make sure we're ready. Marcus turned to him, studying the determination carved into his face. The boy who once stayed silent now stood as a warrior forged in battle. Humanity's promise lived in him, raw and unyielding. The captain gave a slow nod. We will be. The stars beyond shimmered, endless and indifferent, but Marcus felt their weight like eyes watching. The war had shifted. Humanity had revealed its edge. But the true test had yet to come. The swarm did not retreat into silence. Their absence was a preparation, their scattered flights a prelude. When they returned, it was not in fragmented hunting packs, but in a tide vast enough to blot stars from the void. The Council's illusions of control shattered with the first reports. Entire sectors consumed, fortified stations dissolved in days, fleets annihilated despite desperate imitation of human tactics. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy trembled. In the midst of that terror, humanity was summoned not as bait, not as novelty, but as necessity. Marcus stood once more in the council chamber, but the laughter was gone. Faces once twisted with disdain now carried fear, and in fear, respect. We cannot hold them, Chancellor Arachekal admitted, the words heavy as stone. Their fleets outnumber ours 100-fold. Their hives swell beyond reckoning. If they reach the core worlds, all is lost. The chamber turned to Marcus, silent in expectation. He felt the weight of it, the burden of an entire galaxy resting on shoulders they once mocked as too fragile to carry a rifle. Yet he did not waver. Then we strike first, he said. Not at their fleets, not at their swarms. At their heart. Cut out the hive mind before it devours everything. Gasps rippled through the chamber. To assault the swarm's homeworld was unthinkable suicide. But to Marcus, it was the only path left. Weakness had always been survival's teacher. It had taught humanity to risk, to gamble, to endure. The plan took shape in days, forged not from consensus, but from desperation. Coalition fleets would form a diversion, drawing the swarm's tide outward. The humans, leading a spearhead of volunteers, would plunge into the hive world itself, a world wrapped in living metal and endless brood chambers. Strike the brain, and the body would thrash itself apart. The Resolute was patched, scarred but loyal, its crew bound tighter than iron by what they had endured. Elias stood hunched over tactical displays, every scar on his face carved deeper by the burden of command. Holt muttered ceaselessly, eyes fever-bright, theories pouring out faster than breath. Jonas sharpened his blades with silent precision, his grief, now a weapon honed to purpose. And Marcus, though weariness weighed upon him, carried the resolve of a man who understood that survival required more than life. It required victory. When the day came, the galaxy held its breath. The coalition fleets surged into battle, their formations breaking against the endless tide. The Resolute slipped through chaos, a shadow darting toward the inferno at the swarm's heart. The hive world filled the viewport, a planet twisted into nightmare. Its surface writhed as if alive, continents of shifting metal pulsing with bioluminescent veins. Swarms poured from fissures like rivers of fire, endless and ravenous. To descend into it was madness. To descend was hope. "Brace yourselves," Marcus said, voice steady. "We don't leave until this world burns." The Resolute dove. The swarm rose to meet them, thousands of predators encircling, beams lashing like storms. Shields flared, Hull screamed, but Elias wove a path through chaos, threading impossible gaps with reckless genius. Jonas' cannons sang, each volley carving space through the tide. Holt screamed data across the bridge, identifying weak points in shifting patterns, feeding Marcus options that flickered and died in seconds. Every choice was a risk, every second survival bought with blood. They breached the atmosphere, where the air itself shimmered with hostile energy. The hive's surface stretched below, vast caverns opening like wounds. Marcus pointed toward the largest, its walls pulsing with unnatural light. "There," he commanded. "That's where we cut." The Resolute plunged into the abyss, guns blazing, debris collapsing behind them. The cavern opened into a cathedral of horror, pillars of living metal, chambers swollen with embryonic forms, rivers of molten biomass. At its center pulsed the Nexus, a colossal structure of shifting geometry, alive with the rhythm of a heartbeat. Jonas whispered, awed and furious all at once. "That's it. That's the monster." Before Marcus could answer, the swarm struck. Guardians larger than ships emerged, their bodies reconfiguring with every hit, claws that tore through steel with ease. The cavern became a storm of light and death. The Resolute shuddered, battered on all sides. Alarms wailed, bulkheads split, but the crew fought like men possessed. Elias guided the ship with blood streaming from his temple, refusing to yield. Jonas manned the forward batteries even after shrapnel tore into his arm, his aim steady through pain. Holt shouted incoherent brilliance, identifying patterns in the Guardian's movements, guiding fire into fleeting weak points. And Marcus stood at the heart of it all, issuing orders with the calm of inevitability, his voice the anchor that held them together. They reached the Nexus. "Target its core," Marcus ordered. "Jonas, all power to forward guns. Elias, hold her steady if it kills you." The ship aligned, guns blazing into the pulsing heart. The Nexus screamed, the cavern trembling as if the planet itself bled. Guardians convulsed, lashing wildly, tearing into the Resolute with apocalyptic fury. A beam speared the bridge. Metal exploded. Marcus was thrown, fire searing his side. He dragged himself upright through smoke and blood, vision narrowing. Elias was gone, slumped motionless at his station. Holt knelt over him, screaming words Marcus couldn't hear. Jonas still fired, one arm limp, the other driving the cannons with relentless rage. Marcus stumbled to the console, ignoring the fire in his lungs. The Nexus pulsed, wounded but not broken. It needed one final strike, one that would cost everything. He slammed the intercom. "Prepare the core overload. We drive the Resolute straight into it." Holt spun toward him, eyes wild. "That's suicide. It's survival," Marcus said. His voice was quiet, steady, final. Jonas turned, sweat and blood streaking his face. "Captain." Marcus met his gaze, and in that moment, no words were needed. Jonas understood. His brother's death, his vow, his fury, all of it would find meaning here. The ship lurched forward, engines burning beyond safety. Guardians swarmed, clawing, biting, but the Resolute surged through, a spear of human will cutting through the impossible. The Nexus loomed, pulsing, screaming. Marcus pressed the final command. "Fragile flesh endures," he whispered. The Resolute struck the Nexus. Light consumed the cavern. The hive world convulsed, surface fracturing, swarms dissolving into chaos. Across the galaxy, their fleets faltered, coherence shattering as the mind that bound them unraveled. Coalition forces, broken and bloodied, surged forward to claim victory as the tide collapsed. In the heart of fire, Marcus felt only peace. His crew's voices echoed dimly, Jonas' roar of defiance, Holt's cry of awe, Elias' silence. Then there was only light and then nothing. But beyond that nothing, humanity's legacy burned. For when the swarm collapsed, the Council could no longer deny the truth. The weakest had stood where all others fell. The fragile had endured where the mighty broke. And the galaxy would never look upon humans as lesser again.